Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Laurence Gilman. He is a South Texas-based physician and co-founder of Doctors Hospital at Renaissance in Edinburgh, Texas. He is also the author of the book, Fall from Grace. The book details how the federal government subverted constitutional intent to increase the power of government over the people. I think I want to read that book. Dr. Gelman has been host of Talk Back, both nationally and on KURV in McAllen, Texas. Please welcome Dr. Gelman.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm here. So, it's always good to know the facts. I hope it's not too loud about things when you're going up against the other side. So I'm going to say a couple of things, and you may wonder, what does this got to do with the Constitution? Well, it has everything to do with the Constitution. If greenhouse gas molecules increase temperature, then why the moon, without any greenhouse gas molecules, is so much hotter than the Earth during the day? If there aren't any diseases during pregnancy, none whatsoever, which require the intentional killing of the undelivered infant, then why are laws overturned which supposedly do not protect the mother when you want to try to restrict abortions? To initiate a lie is easy. To perpetuate a lie requires government. And government has been lying to us as long as there's been government. Now, I think we need to disabuse ourselves of some terminology and go back to the origins of things. We hear a lot of talk about left and right and conservative and liberal. And that talk comes down through the system of education, through the propaganda machine of the government, because it really doesn't exist. These are all relative terms. And I'm going to show you that with a pretty basic example. I have my left side, I have my right side. You say, if I move to my right, I'm moving like that. If I turn around, I move to my right, I'm moving the opposite direction. That tells us that conservative and liberal are relative terms depending upon the context. In the Soviet Union, a conservative is a communist. In the United States, a conservative is a libertarian. In the Soviet Union, a liberal is a libertarian. In the United States, a liberal is a communist. And so the reason we get caught up in left and right is because in either directions we're forced into government. On the right you have fascists. On the left you have communists. So if you're on the right side, you lean towards one direction, which ultimately in the extreme is fascism or aristocracy, dictatorship. On the left, you start off with your liberal moving over to communism, but then you have aristocracy and dictatorship. It's all the same. And so basically what they want you to believe is that you need government, because that's all there is. You either want you either want fascism, ultimately, or communism. And they leave out the fact that fascism and communism are brothers. They're the same. It doesn't go communism, fascism. It goes anarchy, fascism, communism. What is fascism? Fascism is there's private property, people can own property, but the government determines how that property is used. Communism is where government actually owns the means of production and property. So the only distinction is that you're allowed to own the land. You are a slave in either instance, but you're allowed to own the land you work on in a fascist society. And that's the only difference between the two. So as a quick aside, Bernie Sanders is not a socialist, because because socialists cannot own property. Bernie Sanders owns a home. Bernie Sanders owns a car. Bernie Sanders has a bank account. Bernie Sanders makes more money than the average American. Bernie Sanders has a pension plan. A socialist can have none of that, because in socialism, the community owns everything. And when you pass on what was yours, goes to the community. It doesn't go to your heirs. So Bernie Sanders technically is a fascist and not a socialist. But it highlights the incredible ignorance in our society. Now, in preparing for this little talk, I saw a couple of things that came up, just happened to come up, and I hate watching the television because it drives me completely insane. And what drives me most insane is the people who say they're on our side. Because their side is their side, and the enemy is the enemy. What bothers me is when our side cannot elucidate the principles that supposedly they represent. And I'll give you a couple of examples just from watching the television. Hillary Clinton was on the television, and she was asked about the rights of the unborn child. And she said that the unborn child has no constitutional rights. Subsequently, 2 days later, she was asked the same question and repeated the same answer. Now, the moderator had 2 days to figure out what the heck was going on, because what Hillary Clinton is alluding to in her ignorance is the Roe v. Wade decision. But the Roe v. Wade decision says, quoting, "All this together persuades us that the word person, as used in the 14th Amendment, does not include the unborn." When Hillary Clinton said the unborn child and subsequently the unborn person, when she said that, she was actually undermining her Roe v. Wade decision. Because once you've given the title of person to anything, now that person has constitutional rights. But the moderator is so ignorant, he doesn't understand that the Roe v. Wade decision was based upon the fact that the unborn, which is a misnomer, has no constitutional rights because it's not a person. Well, first of all, the unborn do not have constitutional rights, because when you're unborn, that's before conception. Yes, you have no constitutional rights before conception. We are ignorant in our terminology. In the old days, when you were delivered, you were considered born. Nowadays, we know you're born at conception. You're delivered when you come out of the mother, you are delivered. That is not when you're born. That is when you are delivered. And so the Roe v. Wade decision, if we had smarter people on our side, and we don't have smart people on our side, even using the terminology of the Roe v. Wade decision itself, we could overturn the Roe v. Wade decision, because we have proof that the fetus is born and therefore has constitutional rights. So, on another issue, the ignorance of our side, I was watching C-SPAN. I hate C-SPAN. I was watching C-SPAN, and I was watching these two lawyers, and I hate attorneys. My daughter's an attorney. My son-in-law is an attorney. And we need attorneys, but they still bother me. Anyway, and they were discussing the Roe v. Wade decision. Now, on the one side, you had a Columbia professor. On the other side, you had some other professor that was against the Roe v. Wade decision. And basically, the person against the Roe v. Wade decision is very, what? Anyway, they said that the problem with the Roe v. Wade decision was that it immersed the court system into the matter of abortion, which was not their province. The other side, the Columbia professor, said, well, actually the Roe v. Wade decision was predated by the Griswold versus Connecticut decision in 1967, in which the court declared a right to privacy. Okay? Stay with me. Now the other side, supposedly our side said, now I said, man, that's a fastball down the middle. That is a fastball. Hit it out of the park, because the game is over. Instead, our side said, And of course, it was just so exciting what our side said. Well, our side said, well, you see, in the Griswold versus Connecticut decision, that was overturning a statute, okay? They were saying that particular law was unconstitutional. That's one thing. That's okay. On the other side is the Roe v. Wade decision, which created a law, created the legalization of abortion of the undelivered infant, and therefore that was incorrect. Well, that's a garbage answer, okay? And anyone listening, no one's going to change their mind listening to that kind of an answer. You know what the answer is? When that attorney from Columbia said that the Griswold versus Connecticut decision conferred a right of privacy, which led to the Roe v. Wade decision, the proper answer is there is no right to privacy in the Constitution. It does not exist. What the Constitution says is there's a right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches. And no warrant shall issue without affirmation. Okay? And the places to be searched and people to be seized or property to be seized, it has to be declared. You have to declare that. So there cannot be a right to privacy. Cannot be a right to privacy. Because if there were a right to privacy, you could go to your home and kill somebody and nobody could do anything to you on your private property. That is what a right to privacy means. There is no right to privacy. But you see, if our side knew what they were talking about, then their side is dead in the water. Because the entire Roe v. Wade decision is one lie after another. Everything the government tells us is one lie after another. But to understand or be aware of a lie, you have to understand the truth. And our side does not understand the truth. Now, this did not happen overnight. And I'm probably not going to have time to go through all this. But, and this is just the surface anyway. But the people talk about a living constitution. And when most people talk about a living constitution, it seems to be interpreted as a constitution that's malleable, that's changeable. And so strict constructionists say, and I've heard this over and over again, the Constitution is not alive. I've even heard some of them say the Constitution is dead. Okay, and these are people supporting the Constitution. I said, it doesn't sound good. The Constitution, of course, is alive. It's alive every day since it was ratified. It has to be alive to protect us from the government. And how do we know that it's alive? Because in the Constitution, in Article 1, Section 8, it says, among other things, to promote the progress of science and useful arts. The Congress has the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing in limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. What did our founding fathers know? There were going to be discoveries. There were going to be inventions. Things were going to change. They tell us that, well, we now have the cell phone instead of this other means of communication. We now have automobiles instead of horses. So clearly, the Constitution has not kept up with the times. Nonsense. The Constitution is way ahead of our times. The Constitution is better than what we are. It's waiting for us to catch up to the Constitution. So the Constitution is alive. We're alive. But the mistake that people are making is they want to change the DNA of the Constitution. Well, you and I get older. Our DNA doesn't change. We are the same genetic structure. The genetic structure of the Constitution is not meant to change, but it is alive. Or at least it used to be. But it has been severely crippled. The Constitution has been severely crippled and has been crippled by the very people who are supposed to protect and defend it. And I'm going to tell you how it happened. And it happened. All the way back in 1803. In 1803, we have the most egregious Supreme Court decision ever rendered, which is called the Marbury versus Madison decision. Now, I have found something very interesting, that the justices of the Supreme Court that we all hear about, that we think are great, John Marshall, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Paul Douglas, were the biggest bastards in the world. okay? They're the ones who destroyed the Constitution. And the reason that they're considered so highly is because who promotes them? The system of education. And what is the system of education? The propaganda arm of the federal government. And the federal government wants us to think these people, what do these people do? All what these justices did, Louis Brandeis, John Marshall, all the rest, what they did, the ones you all hear about all the time, what they did is they shifted power from the people to the federal government. In the Marbury versus Madison decision, when John Adams lost the presidency to Thomas Jefferson, John Adams tried to pack the court with Federalists. John Adams was a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson was what they called Democratic Republican. And so nothing really changes that much, does it? So John Adams wanted to pack the courts with Federalists because the opposing party was coming into power. One of those people was I think his name was Marbury. I think it was John. I'm not sure. I can't remember his first name. And now John Marshall was the Secretary of State for John Adams, and he approved that for the judgeship for this Mr. Marbury. When the new president came in, Madison said, "No way, I am not going to approve any more Federalists. We're not doing it." So Marbury sued. And Marbury sued, went to the Supreme Court. Now get this, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Appointed by John Adams. John Marshall, who used to be the Secretary of State. So John Marshall, used to be the Secretary of State, said, that's fine. Now the Supreme Court Justice says, no, that's wrong. Why? Why? It tells us so many things. John Marshall was a Federalist, and what is a Federalist? Someone who believes in the power of central government. Alexander Hamilton, power of central government. Thomas Jefferson believed in the agrarian society, the people, the land. Hamilton was the banker. Jefferson is the farmer, okay? John Adams is the Northeast, okay? The other ones are from not the Northeast, or not the elitist group. And so, so Marshall, in order to promote the Federalist dogma of big central government, wanted Federalists in there. But then, when he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he used the same case to promote the same agenda by doing the opposite thing. Because in the first case, he's putting Federalists on the Supreme Court, in the judge position, which increased the power of the Federalists. And the next thing, what he did in the Marbury versus Madison decision, he made the decision which for all time undermined the Constitution. Because in the Marbury versus Madison decision, what John Marshall did was that he gave the Supreme Court the power of interpretation over the Constitution. What is a court for? What do judges do? What is jurisprudence? Jurisprudence is to explain the law and to cast judgment on events in relation to the law. They are not to make the law. Now, let me give you an example. Let's just say the legislator passes a law that says manslaughter is when you kill someone unintentionally. That's manslaughter, okay? So a case goes to a court where someone is accused of murder. Now we're going to determine whether it's manslaughter or murder. And so the judge cannot say, you know what, that law stinks. That law is no good. If you kill someone, that's murder, intentional or not. The judge cannot do that. All the judge can do is say, well, the law says that if the killing is unintentional, it's manslaughter. So we're going to look at the evidence, and we're going to determine, under the law, according to the events, whether it's manslaughter or not. The courts are not allowed to make law. They're not allowed to revoke law. If you can revoke a law, that's the same as making law, and you can't do that. Now, how did Marshall do it? Well, the way he did it was in 1797, the Congress passed a code dictating how the system of federal jurisprudence was going to function in the nation. They created a system of appellate courts and district courts and the relationship between the state courts and the federal courts. And within it, it was a very long document, within it, there are the authorities that are given to the Supreme Court. Now, the authority given to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to read what Marshall said. Remember, now Marshall is sitting in judgment of Mr. Marbury as to whether the president, whether the executive branch is required to give the judgeship to Mr. Marbury, whether the court can force the executive branch to issue a mandate. So Marshall, what he does, he says, the question Marshall asks of himself is not whether Mr. Marbury deserved the judgeship. The question is, does the Congress have the authority to give the Supreme Court the power to make that decision? And John Marshall says, interestingly enough, think about it for a second. John Marshall says, no, we don't have that authority. We don't have that authority. I mean, so the Congress says, you have that authority, and John Marshall, very smart, says, you know what, we don't have that authority. But the fact that the Congress gave us that authority shows that the Congress doesn't know what it's doing when it comes to the Constitution. The power of interpretation belongs to the Supreme Court. The authority, this is what Marshall says, the authority therefore given to the Supreme Court by the act establishing the judicial courts of the United States to issue writs of mandamus to public officers appears not to be warranted by the Constitution. And it becomes necessary to inquire whether a jurisdiction so conferred can be exercised. I think that's pretty clear, right? Then Marshall says the question whether an act repugnant to the Constitution can become the law of the land is a question deeply interesting to the United States. So Marshall says, now first of all, in the powers of the judiciary, the word writ does not even appear. Does not even appear. So it doesn't matter what the Congress did. The ultimate law is not the Congress, what the Congress legislated. It is the Constitution. And the Constitution, the word writ doesn't appear. So the whole argument by Marshall is completely irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. And Marshall knows it. He knows it. But he's using this as the means, as the wedge, to give the interpretive power to the Supreme Court. Now look what Marshall does. And you can read this in the decision. Look what he does. This is what Marshall writes. In all cases affecting ambassadors, this is what he writes, and he's quoting from the Constitution. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdictions. In all other cases, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. That's in the decision. That's what he wrote. That's what he wrote, quoting the Constitution. Is it an accurate quote? No. What does the Constitution actually say? The Constitution actually says, and those in which a state shall be a party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction in all other cases before mentioned. The Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. If you take out the two words before mentioned, it makes it appear, it sounds like in all other cases, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction. In all other cases. But that's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says, in all other cases, before mentioned. The distinction is, the Constitution mentions all the cases the Supreme Court can do. If you say before mentioned, that means only these instances, only these characterizations, only this nature is what the Supreme Court can handle. only what's listed. He made it seem like in all other cases. I know this may seem somewhat, upon such things does the world revolve. You can see the intent of Marshall. Marshall wants to give the authority to the Supreme Court to determine what the law of the land is. And when you do that, that gives the power to the central government. Because what is more powerful? The Constitution or the interpreter of the Constitution? Well, the interpreter of the Constitution is more powerful. But there are no interpreters to the Constitution. There are no interpreters to the Constitution. The Constitution is the apex, and everything else is below it. Your ability to interpret the Constitution stands, according to our founding fathers, at exactly the same level as a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You have as much right to interpret the Constitution as a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Okay? So, I hope I'm not boring people. I find it very exciting myself. There was one other, so from that, all the problems we have today, everything we have today, the Roe v. Wade decision, all the problems that we have today come from that decision. But it wasn't a single decision. It was a series of decisions. Now, here's one. This is great. Anyone like Sherlock Holmes? This is great. I amaze myself. This is just the best stuff. I don't know. People just, they don't. I'm going to show you something here. It's just, okay. There's a Supreme Court decision called Collins versus the State of Virginia in 1825. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. Anyway, in that decision, this was the issue. The issue was, let me throw that away. The issue was, does the Supreme Court have the authority to overrule a state Supreme Court decision? That was the issue at the time. Of course, now we know they do it with reckless abandon. But the question was, does the Supreme Court, and the Virginia State Supreme Court said, you don't have any authority over us, and that's what they said. In fact, they refused to send a representative to the Supreme Court. They refused to send a representative to the Supreme Court from the state of Virginia on this issue. Buying and selling a lottery ticket is not relevant. Because the Virginia State Supreme Court said, take a hike. You have no authority over us. We're a sovereign state. You have no authority over us. Those days are gone, aren't they? Because our judges, they just collapse like a house of cards. Oh, you want to have a third gender? You want that bathroom for a third gender? Hey, we don't agree with it, but you're the almighty court. You want to kill 25, 50 million infants? We don't agree with it, but we ain't got the guts to do anything about it because you're the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't have that authority. Okay, it just doesn't have that authority. In the Collins versus Virginia decision, this is what Marshall said. Marshall said that the powers of the judiciary, and if you look it up, you'll see the powers of the judiciary in Article 3, are of two parts. One part is that we can handle all cases of constitutional issues. One part. The second part is we can handle all other cases even if they're not constitutional issues. Well, that's nuts. Okay? And you laugh, but that's exactly the way we function. That's exactly the way the country functions today. And Marshall said that because he said that the Supreme Court has been given the authority by the Constitution to determine the law in this country. And therefore, we have to have authority. We will decide. This is what the Supreme Court, this is what he said. He said, we agree that there are some things which are the province of the state, but we will decide what those things are. That's what he said. Because he separated the nature and the character. The nature of the problem, constitutional issue, versus the character of the litigants, the state, the person, whatever. How do we know that he's wrong? How do we know that he's wrong? We know that he's wrong because in the Constitution, it says that there's no authority given to the Supreme Court on any issue between a citizen and the state government. Between the citizen of a state and the state government, the Supreme Court has not given any authority. Okay? Now, if the Supreme Court had authority over all constitutional issues, which is what Marshall said, then why would the Supreme Court not have any authority over constitutional issues between a state and its citizen? Doesn't make any sense. Constitutional issues are constitutional issues, whether they're between states, between a state and a citizen of another state, or between citizens of the same state and the government, or citizens of different states. Constitutional issues are constitutional issues. Why would the Founding Fathers not have included that in the power of the Supreme Court? And to put the final nail in the coffin, we have the 11th Amendment, which stripped the right of the Supreme Court of interfering in any case between the citizen of one state and the government of another. Any issues, not just constitutional, any issues. Why? Because the states, when the states had intestinal fortitude, when the federal government in the Chisholm versus Georgia decision tried to get involved in an internal matter of a state, when a citizen of one state was suing another state on a question of a debt from the Revolutionary War, the states got so upset at the attempt of the Supreme Court to intervene in that case that they passed the 11th Amendment, which prohibited the Supreme Court or the federal courts to become involved in any case, not constitutional cases, non-constitutional, doesn't matter, any case between the citizen of one state and the government of another state. And what does that prove to us? That proves to us that despite what Marshall said, if you look at the Constitution, what it actually says is that when it talks about constitutional issues, and it talks about the things like ambassadors and states and citizens, that the issues that the Supreme Court can only be involved in a certain set of litigants, of characters, or only a certain set, and only on these issues. In other words, you can only get involved in a situation between two states and only if it's a constitutional issue. That's it. The Supreme Court was saying is, we can get involved with anyone, anywhere, at any time for any issue whatsoever. And we know that's false, so we know it's false. I hope that was clear, because just by reading the Constitution, we know that's false because, and I'll repeat it once again, because if any constitutional issue, if a constitutional issue could be applied to any parties, then the Founding Fathers would not have left out the prohibition of the federal courts being involved in an intrastate affair. If a constitutional issue was all that counted. So we know that's not the case. And with the 11th Amendment, it's proven. So it's proven simply by reading the Constitution, simply by reading the decision, it's proven what Marshall was lying, and he had an agenda. And we know Marshall had an agenda all along. And there were other decisions which he was involved with. Now, I hope that's clear. That's extremely important. It's all there. You can read it yourself if you want to. Everything I said is right out of the Constitution, right out of the decision. I've read a bunch of decisions, and I've written about a bunch of decisions. Now, I know we're running out of time. They talk about amendments. Every amendment after the 12th Amendment is not legitimate. Blanket statement. Every amendment after the 12th Amendment is not legitimate. And interestingly enough, every amendment after the 12th Amendment was after our Founding Fathers had passed on. The 11th Amendment was a restriction on the court. The 12th Amendment was how you elected the president. It was another 60 years. It was another 60 years before the next amendment was brought on forth, which was the 13th and the 14th Amendment. So real quick now, the 14th Amendment, why do that stuff? Anyway, okay, the 14th Amendment. You think you're citizens of the United States, don't you? That's not the way it was supposed to be. It's not the way it was supposed to be. You are supposed to be citizens of Texas. You are people of the United States. You are not citizens of the United States. And how do we know that? Because I can't find it. But anyway, the 14th Amendment, I'm just trying to get through here. The 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment was after the Civil War. It was not a declared war, an illegal war. It was a fascist war, okay? The South may have wanted to secede because of slavery, maybe so, maybe not. But what is for sure, the North did not attack the South on the issue of slavery. That is for sure. What is for sure, and how do we know that? Because the Emancipation Proclamation did not include 4 slave states that were border states, not part of the Confederacy, so slavery was not the issue. And the Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863. The war started when? 1861. Why did he wait 2 years? What was he hoping for? The fact of the matter is that Lincoln was a fascist, and his goal was to create a fascist empire. He didn't want the southern states to leave because he wanted to maintain his empire like any aristocrat does. 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Why? What? I mean, aren't we citizens of the United States? Why do you need to put that in there? Because we weren't citizens of the United States. What does the Constitution say? It doesn't say, we the citizens of the United States. It says, we the people of the United States. In the Civil War, the sides were, you joined the army of the state that you belonged to. Robert E. Lee left West Point to join the Northern Army of Virginia, to lead that, not because he believed in slavery, but because he was a citizen of Virginia. And his first loyalty is to the state of Virginia. Okay? Nowadays, nobody thinks like that. Now everybody thinks you're a citizen of the United States, but you're not a citizen of the United States. You were never meant to be a citizen of the United States. The United States was meant to be a confederation of sovereign states bound together under a common ideology and culture and language. That was what we're supposed to be. We are not supposed to be citizens of the United States. We are supposed to be citizens of Texas. Texas belongs to the Confederation of States that comprises the United States. That's the way it was supposed to be. What does the 14th Amendment do? Your allegiance is no longer to the state of Texas. Your allegiance is to the fascists in Washington, D.C. That's what Abraham Lincoln wanted. That's what he got. And that's what we have. Now, to some of you, most people out there say, but this guy out of his mind. What's he talking about? Well, I can assure you, if you look back at the history of the United States, if you had mentioned to a Texan or a Virginian or an Alabama or a New Yorker that you're a citizen of the United States, they'd have punched you in the mouth. I'm not a citizen of the United States. I'm a citizen of New York. I'm a citizen of Texas. And I'm a proud citizen of whatever state I'm in. And this gave the power to the central government over the people, because now your allegiance is not to Texas, it's to central government. Leading us to the 16th and 17th Amendment, and I'm almost done. The 16th Amendment is the personal income tax. The 16th Amendment says, the Congress has the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among several states, whatever. What was it before? Before it was Article 1, Section 2, representatives and direct taxes, which is a personal tax, personal income tax, and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union. Article 1, Section 9. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census. How is it supposed to work? The way it's supposed to work is the central government assesses a tax on a state based upon enumeration. Obviously, if you have a common defense and you have 100 people, it's going to cost more to take care of 100 people than 10. So for 100 people, we're going to assess 10 times more than on 10 people. Then the state will assess a direct tax on the individual in order that everybody coughs up what they need for the common defense. Let me ask you a question. We have the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, right? Now, if I said, we're going to make a slight amendment. we're going to say, we do not hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, it's all changed, isn't it? And you'd say, that's not legitimate. You can't do that. The Declaration of Independence is inviolate. You can't do that. It says all men are created equal. That's what the country stands for. You can't put there not. You change everything. And we'd all rise up in arms if anyone wanted to do that, wouldn't we? If someone said, we're going to change the Declaration of Independence that says we're not all created equal, people would go crazy. Maybe not New York, but they would go crazy. That's what we did to the Constitution. The Constitution said the federal government has no authority over the individual. The federal government has no authority to impose a personal income tax, a capitation tax on the individual. The federal government has no authority to do that. The government comes along and says, not. And we go along with it. Well, when you do that to the what has that done to us? Where do you send your money? You send your money to Washington, D.C. Where does the power go? The power goes with the money. If the state, the EPA, says, stop drilling for oil. In 1860, Texas would have said, take a hike, okay? Now, the EPA says, oh, well, if you don't stop drilling for oil, we're not going to give you any money for your highways, for your Medicaid, for your this and your that. And so the state, our gutless wonders in Austin, you're right, we give it. We surrender. We'll do whatever you want. We're opposed to it. That's so we can get reelected, but we're not going to do anything about it because we know which side of the who butters our bread. It's a completely unconstitutional amendment. It's completely and absolutely unconstitutional. It has transferred the power from the state to the federal government. One more thing. 17th Amendment. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state elected by the people. Elected by the people. Good idea. What did it used to be? Our founding fathers said, and this was written in 1867 or something like that, that's, 90 years after the Revolutionary War, 80 years after the Constitution, So our founding fathers were addle-headed, they were drunk. Well, yeah, what the heck? Well, what should we do? I mean, do you think there was a reason that the founding fathers said the senators should be chosen by the state legislature? There was a reason for that. And the reason was the power is supposed to be in the hands of the states. And if the senators are chosen by the legislature of a state, then who do they owe their allegiance to? The legislature of the state. Who do they owe their allegiance to now? The political party. The Republican National Committee, the Democratic National Committee, the Republican Party, the Democrat Party. That's who they owe their allegiance to, not to us. We're screwed, okay? That's what's happened to us. We have no representation. We have no representation. The Republican Party has plenty of representation. The Democrat Party has representation. We have no representation and I get calls from Maine to California to support senators all over the country who I never heard of, in states I've never been in. If I give money to someone in Maine that's running for senator, I have more authority now over the senator who's going to run in Maine than someone in Maine who doesn't give money to that senator. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Of course not. If you're wondering why Cornyn is such a wuss, that's why. Okay? I mean, he is. Okay, so it's all there. I mean, everything's there if you want to look at it. But we don't have any real representation because we don't have anyone who represents us. Now, all these idiots. I think I don't know who these people are. I don't know where they find them. I know they must look good on TV, but they are so stupid. I mean, the Electoral College. What is the Electoral College? You say, well, it's so antiquated. We got to get rid of it. Oh, let the people decide. Well, screw that. I don't want the people to decide. I want the Constitution to decide. If I want the people to decide, then we wouldn't need a Constitution. Go on the internet, punch in the box, and that's our law. The Constitution is the law of the land, not the majority of the people. Because what the majority does is impose their will on the minority. And that's what happens to people all over the world. The Constitution was not made for the majority, it was made for the minority of one. Each person, individual, has all the rights. And when you do that, you eliminate all issues of ethnicity, of color, of religion. All goes away because now it's down to the individual. But when you go by groups, which is what they want, now you have the blacks and the whites and the old and the young and the men and the women and all and the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and all fighting each other, and that's what the government wants. Because when the people are divided, the government is strong. And the government makes the laws to keep us weak and to keep the government strong. So, the Electoral College, the reason the Electoral College exists is because you're supposed to have the power to the state. The state, the legislature chooses the electors. They're loyal to the state, and they go wherever they meet, and they choose a president. Because that's the way it's supposed to be. The power is supposed to be in the states, and they want to eliminate it. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I am not interested in my life being run by Al Sharpton. Okay? And that's who's running my life today, Al Sharpton, because Al Sharpton is a lot closer to Barack Obama than I am. Okay? And I don't want my life run by Chuck Schumer either. And I don't even like his niece. Okay? So I don't want my life run by them. I want to be able to run my own life. And that is what's been taken away from us. And I'm going to finish with this. It all boils down to something very, very simple. When you talk to your Democrat friend or whoever, it all comes down to a very basic thing. Do you want to run your life, or do you want someone in Washington to run your life? And that's the whole thing. Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders think they're smarter than you. And they want Washington to run your life because you're too stupid to run your life, okay? On the other hand, we have Donald Trump, who wants to be king. And I think he might be a good king. But there are no good kings. Because there's no such thing as a good king and a bad king. Because even the concept of a king is a denial of individual rights. If you have an aristocracy of denial of individual rights, and the only person running, not today, that holds up the Constitution as the standard is Senator Ted Cruz. And that's what I support, because he understands the way things are supposed to be. But, it never even gets brought up, When they ask the president to show you the ignorance of the country, the ignorance of the nation, you see it all the time. Mr. President, doesn't matter if it's George Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Mr. President, what are you going to do about the economy? The very fact that the question is asked shows the incredible ignorance of the person asking the question and of the people sitting there, because the president has nothing to do with the economy. The president is not supposed to be in charge of the economy, but it's illustrative of the level of ignorance that is so pervasive throughout the nation today. And I blame that on the system of education and on the media, but that's not a surprise because they're all arms of the central government. Okay, that's all I have time for. If anyone has any questions, I have all the answers. You want to solve Medicare? I have the answer. I have all the answers. I'm serious. I have all the answers. And I'm going to tell you one thing right now. Cutting the budget is not the answer, because what they're going to cut is what's necessary to make you hurt. Okay? All the cronies, all the crooks, all the Wall Street guys, just Bernie Sanders, all the bankers, they're not going to get cut. What's going to get cut is services to you, so that you scream and say, no, tax us some more. Cutting taxes is good. Cutting the budget means nothing. Because when I lived in Chicago, when they cut the budget, the first thing they did was cut the number of police and cut the number of firemen. They didn't cut the number of mistresses to the mayor, okay? Oh, I forgot, that's New York. That's all. Any questions or anything? No questions? Yeah.
Sir, what do you, I mean, considering the money system we have today, which is debt, it's based on debt, fiat money, where do you see that going? I mean, you mentioned the Wall Street guy, Annie, I mean, big government and big money have been in bed together for a long time, and a lot of these, like the 13th Amendment, or not 13th Amendment, where they changed the laws where they could collect taxes, you know, it all started back in 1913.
Well, on the present trajectory, the country will dissolve. I don't know when, but it will dissolve. It happened every single time throughout history, whether it's the Byzantine Empire, the Egyptian Empire, Sumerian, English Empire, doesn't matter. When money runs out and morality gets wiped out, the empire dissolves. So on the present trajectory, the United States will cease to exist at some point. Frankly, it doesn't bother me, you know. Yeah.
This is a pretty wild question, but what if Texas was to secede from the Union? We are big and powerful, we have everything going for us if we stand alone.
What would happen? We would all become much more prosperous. We would be involved. Our sons and daughters would not be sent off to the sands of the Middle East to be killed by a bunch of nuts. We would have peaceful relationships with our neighbors to the south. That's what would happen. The government couldn't possibly stand that. Texas has the 13th largest economy in the world, as big as Russia. We don't need New York. We don't want New York. But they need us. But you're exactly right. What would happen is we would all be better off, okay? And we wouldn't, and we'd all be richer and happier and better fed and better healthcare and better all that if we got rid of the central government. With the way but with the system the way it's structured, where our senators, though Republican, are in the pockets of big money, and maybe not Ted Cruz, but definitely Cornyn. And when we have our state house with Strauss, who's definitely in, you know, he's Bernie Sanders. And I'm not too big on Abbott either, for that matter. The fact of the matter is, it's in their interest to have big government. Okay, and as long as the people who represent us, it's in their interest to have big government. That will not happen. Well, you're 100% correct. There's no reason whatsoever. That Texas needs to belong to the Union. We derive no benefit, and we are hurt a great deal. There's no reason whatsoever. But when you bring up something like that, people run for the hills because they get scared. They think, oh my God, without belonging to Washington, D.C., we would be helpless. You know, all these people our borders would be unprotected. All our money, you know, we'd be, you know, then we'd have all these people invading us, telling us not to drill or to frack or things like that. We'd have all these crooks coming in, taking all of our money. Oh, that's what's happening now. Oh, never mind. So, yeah, no, you're right. I'm 100% with you. I think secession is the way to go. And it'd be easy to do. It's easy to do. Look, the Confederation was formed voluntarily. Even Cecil, we voted. You can go in, you can leave. Okay, I can assure you that if the people of Texas decide to leave the Union, that we would all be better off. And I don't know what they're thinking of doing. The only people in the military are Texans anyway. So, anything? Huh? Yeah.
What about an Article 5 convention where you say that?
Well, I'm obviously for it. The problem is you're going to get a bunch of shysters in there. Okay? We're a bunch of rubes. We're going to get in there, and before you know it, we're going to make it work. I mean, you got to go in there with smart people, that are chosen by the people, smart lawyers, chosen by, with an agenda. And it has to be limited, it has to be focused. If it were up to me, I would say, eliminate, just the way we eliminated the 18th Amendment, the restriction on alcohol with the 21st Amendment, okay, the same way we did that, you got to eliminate the 14th, 16th, and 17th.
Yep.
If you can go in there and just focus on it, see where they'll get you is they'll get you off here. You ever read the South African Constitution? Do it. You can't, it's impossible. But it's like a phone book. But basically it says, well, Mrs. So-and-so on 3rd Street has these rights, and I mean, it's ridiculous, okay? That's what they're going to try to do to us. They're going to get you all meshed up in minutia. So, but obviously, it has to be done. The only way, there are 2 ways to save the nation. You can secede, and who cares about the rest of them, as long as we're okay, or make the Constitution the way it was meant to be. And it's perfectly legitimate, because using the arguments that I've said here, you can show that the Constitution has been subverted from original intent. It's very, very obvious. And so therefore, you can go in there and say, you don't even have to do much. You just have to say, we're revoking the 14th, 16th, and 17th Amendment. And say, we're done, take a vote, we're done, we're going home. That's what you need to do. Right?